All right, so welcome to Podcast, which is a Dutch podcast. My name is Rico Brouwer, and I'm very happy to announce my guest, the returning guest, Mr. Martin Armstrong. Hello, Martin.
Hello, nice to hear you again.
Thank you for talking to us again. Yeah, we talked a little under a year ago on election night between Biden and Trump, and so much has happened since then. So I tried to make sense of what's going on, as is everyone. And I thought, well, let's ask Martin to see what if you can shed some light on current affairs. All right.
Well, I think if you look at what's really happening, it's a global effort. And for the past 10 years, I've been meeting with different governments and I've been warning really that the problem has been that they borrow year after year with no intention of paying anything back.
Yeah.
Then the ECB lowered the interest rates to negative in 2014. I mean, here we are approaching 8 years, and it has failed to work. All right, so all their old models, the Keynesian ideas, everything has collapsed. So effectively what I was arguing was that the solution should be to issue coupons. You then swap the coupons for the government debt. We end government debt. They're no longer allowed to borrow. They do more or less what the Roman Empire did. They just created the money that they need that year. And, I mean, it should be capped at like 3 to 5%, et cetera. I mean, if you look at the national debts in most countries, it goes anywhere between 50 to 70% of the actual debt that's outstanding is a cumulative interest payment.
Yeah.
So it never went to create schools and roads and things of this nature. I mean, it's a system that is failing. So in comes basically a debt crisis where they're approaching the point where they can no longer really sell debt. And governments are not intelligent. They don't, this is like going to a taxi driver or a Uber driver and say, gee, are you free tomorrow? Can you give me, I need some brain surgery done. I mean, these people have no degrees in what they're doing. Most of them are lawyers. It's all just consensus. They have no expertise. All right, so this is really the crisis that we face. And my idea was basically to take these coupons, and then they would be restricted. You could then swap them for equities in your country. Now, that would do two things. One, it would allow smaller businesses to suddenly have capital available to them to expand. I mean, you would be hiring people, et cetera. That would be tremendous. Right now, the small business has to compete against the government. And, you go to a bank and you always pay more and they'll say, well, gee, why should I give it to you when I get absolute AAA guaranteed from the government? But we've now reached this point where when they push rates to negative, they have really destroyed the bond markets. So the whole system is coming down. Pension funds, they had regulated, and most were told from, anywhere from 50 to 100% had to be in government bonds. Then you make them negative. So now you have pension funds that are insolvent. All right. So my view was that we would reduce the size of government, keep our freedom, and expand the economy. On the opposite side of the table from me, it's been Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
He argued default on the debt, but to really suppress the people and move more towards authoritarianism. And because the pension funds will all go bust, he wants that swapped out, and then you get guaranteed basic income. So this is part of the entire problem. And the government pension funds are also broke. If you look at the Biden proposal, what is really outrageous in this is that the average American citizen already has to pay into Social Security, supposed to be for your pension. All right. In his proposals, 10% of your salary will now be taken and forced into a government pension plan. So, and then you don't get the money back, you get an annuity. I mean, this is effectively how, the city-states collapsed during the 14th and 15th century. So Schwab is basically saying just default on everything, seize everything, and move towards authoritarianism. And if you look at his 8 points for his Agenda 2030, he believes in this fictitious idea, the same way with George Soros, that a one-world government will end wars.
So
that's why you have the EU. They thought this will end European war. The Roman Empire was also one government. It does not stop it. You have, different economies, different regions, etc. I mean, there were so many different civil wars that broke out. I mean, this is kind of a fictitious idea that if everybody surrenders their power to the United Nations, it will be such a wonderful world of panacea. And what he's also got in there, if you look at his 2030 agenda, there'll be no more right to vote. Democracy should be exterminated.
I'm going to, Martin? I'm going to close it, if I may. We'll end this conversation with a question on the Netherlands, where democracy pretty much, we're still pretending it is democracy, but we did vote, and now we're getting our old government back that has been fired through fraud. So one could argue that democracy has died already here in a country that's perceived as having a solid democracy. You said so much already. Would you allow me to walk through some of your examples and extend on those? But before we do that, I have to introduce you to the audience. Not everybody knows Martin Armstrong. So what I prepared...
Are we starting over?
No, definitely not. No. No.
Okay.
I will continue where you were. No worries there, because that would be my first question. The example that you made with your plan that obviously didn't get traction, or that would be my question, did your coupon plan and to move forward, did it get traction anywhere? But park that for a second. But we are on Klaus Schwab's course currently. So default on the debt. That would be my first question. But before we go there, I would introduce you like this. Martin Armstrong, as a programmer, created a computer system called Socrates. You call that thing Socrates. And it's an artificially intelligent program that takes in and correlates many sources of information and their effect throughout history. So, we're talking because you're a historian of sorts, you're a lawyer, you're a trained lawyer. And when I asked you to introduce yourself last time, how would you introduce yourself? You called yourself a trader of the economic kind. I got to know you through a Dutch historian, Mr. Erik Mekking, and I'll refer to him in a short bit also when I asked Erik. So I'm going to talk to Martin Armstrong again. What would you ask him? So that would be my first question in a second. Wrapping up on your introduction, you look at pretty much everything through cycles through time, in our human nature and in nature itself, in Earth, and cycles of the sun. So that would be my introduction. And now my question this time would be, did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. It's not my personal opinion. It's basically doing what Adam Smith did and trying to investigate to figure out how this all works, rather than to try and tell it how I believe it should work.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's pick up where you started. We are on a trajectory of sorts designed by Klaus Schwab, if I would summarize what you just said, which pretty much includes default on the debt. So that will be government debt. Now, government debt is at the core of our monetary system. Those will be obligations by government, like bonds, not obligations by central banks. But central banks have, these are your words, the ECB killed the European bond market by buying that government debt. So that's now in the possession of central banks and in possession of pension funds that are made to buy these things. The United States did something similar with their QE programs, and pretty much everyone owns foreign reserves. So, Martin, what happens to the euro-dollar market when faith in government, so faith in those bonds, would fail?
That is when everything begins to really crack. Everybody knows something is wrong, but we just don't maybe all agree and point the finger. We can't figure it out exactly what it is. You have people saying, "Oh, it's the capitalists that are the problem," and they point to people like Schwab and Gates and Soros. They're abusing the system, using their money for political purposes. A capitalist is more or less the small businessman and capitalism is where you have the freedom to actually be what you want to be. On the other hand, if you look at the communism, absolutely nothing ever came out of communism from any innovative idea. The only thing they ever developed was nuclear weapons, and Russia tried to compete with the U.S. in the space race. When you take away all incentive from people, then you see there was no innovation whatsoever. And that's why communism absolutely collapsed. Schwab is basically thinks that he can create a hybrid. And they really think that the reason communism failed is because they didn't have everybody in it, which is kind of really a stupid idea, but this is the way they are. It's not that he's going to give up all his assets or Gates or Soros, etc. They believe that the elite should be there. Somebody has to be there to control us. It was when Trump was elected, when they went really against democracy. They changed the word and they called it populism. And populism has to be eliminated because career politicians suddenly realized that they could be voted out of power. So you can throw out, your government as you did in Netherlands. I mean, Austria just, the PM had to resign over corruption there. Australia, you had the minister from New South Wales had to resign because of being investigated for $10 million worth of bribes, basically over these COVID restrictions. When you're in government like this, and you're there for life, you have no other opportunity to make money. They all leave multimillionaires. How is that? I mean, even if you look at Obama, he was nearly broke when he went in, and now he leaves and he has, buys $10 million houses on the beach. Where does this money come from? The Clintons, they were bankrupt, now worth hundreds of millions. I mean, these things are just, amazingly, the press is largely paid off or turns a blind eye. And if these people are public servants and they're only supposed to be making, a couple $100,000 a year, how do they walk out of there multimillionaires? But this is the way it is. And Klaus Schwab's idea is basically kind of taking us back to feudalism, where there is this elite that they own all the assets. he and his buddies have no intention of giving up their assets. And we are supposed to sit back, shut up, take whatever they tell us. And I've been in meetings with people like this. Their real view is everything belongs to them. They decide how much we're allowed to keep. That's it. This is their view. And it's very sad, but we go through these things. Roughly, Marxism seems to come up on a regular cycle of about 86 years.
Even before Marx, then? How was that before?
Yes, it's not something that is just unique. I mean, it's interesting. Even the Ten Commandments, it says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's good." Okay? Yeah. So obviously, people have always been, for a very long time, he's got more than me, that's not fair, I should be entitled to it. I mean, so this has been around for a very long time. There was even a Roman emperor in 235 AD who declared all assets in the country belonged to him.
On the positive,
similar, paid.
Yeah,
it's just crazy, but this has been around for a very, very long time.
You are a guest to the. I'm recording You're on the telephone line, but I'm recording my face, and I'm showing my logo here. You're on the podcast. Podcast in Dutch, that means pot with candle. So these are conversations of hope. Well, there is an actual bit of a corny candle here, burning on this table. On the positive side, if I take what you just said and I turn that into a positive, I've been on demonstrations in the Netherlands, and a year ago those were small. And now there's over 100,000 for the Netherlands. That's a lot. And some would claim over 200,000 people on the streets only a month ago. So public opinion is changing. Now is great if you like demonstration, if you would like the general audience to start be more aware. But I read my Martin Armstrong newsletters and you say, well, all hell breaks loose if trust in governments fails, but that's when trust in currency also fails. That is the core to that question. What happens to the way the euro and the dollar are connected in the city of London, where those things are pretty much unregulated, exchanged? What happens when we lose faith in our currency, or do we anytime soon?
No, you do. And there are plenty of examples throughout history. Probably the most extreme was in Japan. Every time a new emperor came in, he devalued all the outstanding money supplied to 10% of his. After 2 or 3 of them, the people figured it out, okay, and they wouldn't accept Japanese coins. The emperors lost the ability to even issue coins. People used Chinese coins, and they used bags of rice for money. And the government lost the right to actually create money for 600 years. That's how long it was. This has been around for even if you go back to the famous Peloponnesian War, Sparta versus Athens. Sparta had no money, okay? It was a communist state. Everybody was a commune. Basically, that's the way it was. It was communism even back then against democracy and art and freedom and things of this nature that arrived. So these trends have been around for a very, very long time. And what happens is you take the German hyperinflation, which is mostly misunderstood. People think that, you create money and that created the inflation. No, it's backwards. What happened was in December 1922, the German government, the Weimar Republic, confiscated 10% of everybody's assets. They issued you a bond. And that is what sparked it. People lost confidence in government, everything. They just stole your money. So you then have the hyperinflation, 1923. So there's some event that it takes place where the confidence collapses. We are approaching that. And as we go into 2022, you're going to see more of it. I mean, this COVID crisis, pandemic, whatever, has been used basically to restrict people's movements. This is political. This is not for health reasons. I mean, if you really look at it, the death toll is less than 0.5%. The Spanish flu of 1918 was 3 to 5%.
Hang on. This will come back. I have questions on that. So we will go to the cycle of disease and 2022, if you allow me, in a moment. I wasn't aware of that example of Weimar Germany. However, there was almost literally a plan by the IMF, I believe, that says, well, let's just confiscate, I don't know if it was 10%, something like that, just one time. People will accept one time. Just confiscate some of their wealth, and then we can kick the can down the road. So that plan never came to pass. But there was an actual IMF plan, I believe, 10 years ago or something.
Oh, yes. I mean, this is stuff that they normally throw out. Confiscate everybody's assets. Yeah. Claim it one time, wealth indexes, wealth tax one time. They do this always.
Is the loss of faith in government and in our currency part of Klaus Schwab's plans, do you think?
Well, this is why he's basically pushing for more authoritarianism, because he realizes there's going to be a backlash. Yeah. But I don't think they understand the full scope of this. Communism and the revolution in Russia in 1917 worked for a simple reason. Serfdom existed at that point in time up until 1861. It was in Russia. It prevailed for hundreds of years after Western Europe. So when serfdom was outlawed, you're talking about one generation. So the people had no wealth; they owned no land. All right. So the whole communist idea made sense. Okay, let's go get the rich, et cetera, et cetera. They had nothing to lose. What Schwab doesn't realize, and why you are seeing, resistance is going to continue to rise, is this time people do own houses. The average person is not broke. It's not a serf, not a slave. We do have assets. We have a car or whatever. And his idea, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, is so absurd. It's ridiculous. He doesn't appreciate that this time the average person has assets. And you're expecting everybody like that just to give him up? Not him, of course, but everybody else. We should give up and we won't own our houses. We'll just pay rent, etc. I mean, this is really absurd.
I have a nice question on Schwab coming up in a moment also. Just to wrap up on where you started, you said, I volunteered a plan a couple of years ago. And to follow up on that thing, did it fall on deaf ears everywhere? Or was it received favorably in some governments or some people in positions?
I would say it was not rejected per se. It's just that my plan says they have to give up some power. Schwab's plan says they get more power. Yeah. They don't have to be elected anymore. They just seize power. They become dictators. So my plan is basically we do keep populism. That's what democracy is all about. And they relinquish power. They stop borrowing, etc. Yeah. People don't realize that what Marxism has really done. They no longer know how to run for office. Vote for me, and I'll give you this that, and the other thing. It's bribery. There's no basic argument say vote for me because I will run the economy better than that person. That's like dull and boring. Vote for me and I'll take something from them and I'll give it to you and you'll get free this or whatever. It's bribing the people. This is what Marxism has really done. So since World War II, these people have constantly pitched, vote for me and you'll get this, but vote for me and you'll get that. And we've now just reached the end of the road. They can't continue this borrowing to fund these promises that they keep making. And we've reached the end, and this is what's collapsing. And as it collapses, people are beginning to realize. And I think, honestly, this COVID thing is part of it. Because at the beginning they said, if once everybody is vaccinated in the world, we'll exterminate COVID. Now that is an absolute scientific impossibility. You could do it with smallpox because it only existed in humans. These viruses exist not just in humans, but also animals. You get the bird flu, then next time it's the swine flu, etc. I mean, you can never get rid of these things. It's like the common cold. They can't cure that. The flu season, they give us a shot that changes every year. It's, this type of virus is with us always. Period.
All right.
So
yeah, we
they were lying about it.
Yeah. In 2 minutes, I've got a question on that one. But just to wrap up the first bit, I want to move into something else first. There's two things that people might know you from. You host a newsletter through Armstrong Economics, which is, for part anyways, free. You send it out every day. Very cool source of information. But also you host the World Economic Conference. Now, the upcoming World Economic Conference is November 5, 6, and 7 in Orlando, right? Correct. Oh, cool. So I read up on that thing, and on its announcement page, it says, after a lot of careful consideration, including the consideration of a potential turning point ahead in October, as in this month, we have strategically planned our 2021 World Economic Conference for early November, and it's one not to be missed. So, Martin, what potential turning point in October are we talking about?
Well, I think it's basically on a global scale. I mean, just look at what's happened already in these months. You've had Prime Minister of Austria had to resign. Same thing in Australia. New Zealand suddenly had to back off. We're getting more and more evidence that all this propaganda on COVID is coming to a head. You had Scandinavia out, basically saying, no more Moderna for men under 30. Iceland just joined them. You had U.S. trying to say, we still think the benefits outweigh the risks. But they're not giving anybody what are the risks up front, or do you should have the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to take the risk. No. So all this is coming to a head.
Yes,
it's confidence that's collapsing in everything. The stock market has come down. All this is basically developing, and we're probably going to see more of a shock going into like the first week of November.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is really what's happening.
Things used to change on a schedule by measured in years and then in months, and now things change by the week even. If let's do the disease and the corona thing then. In 2018, in your newsletter, you wrote about swine flu, H1N1, the swine flu in 2009, and you said there's a 13-year cycle to the flu, making 2022, so next year, a next cyclical target. On the World Economic Conference announcement, you talk about the cycle of disease that comes into play in 2022. And I quote, included in the materials for the World Economic Conference will be a special report on all the forecasts on population and the cycle of disease that comes into play in 2022. Now, you also said that the corona thing last time I spoke to you, like a year ago, you said Corona, that's mostly political. But what I just quoted, that's measurable. There are real cycles coming into play next year. So what are you expecting? What is Socrates expecting in the year ahead?
Well, the coronavirus, I think there's a fair amount of evidence that it was engineered in a lab, and I believe it was deliberately released, because I do know people that were saying a virus was coming, and that was in December 19, January. So there was advanced rumors out there that something was taking place. However, even though you created Corona and in a lab and you released it, it's a virus, which means it's going to constantly mutate. Is this going to be the source for the rise in 2022? Perhaps. There are other viruses that are starting to pop up again, including the swine flu. There's even reports of black plague starting again in China. So there's an awful lot that's coming to a head already, and we will probably see that develop more next year. And I think you're going to see this. The more things are proven that this has been orchestrated, I think this goes towards the collapse in confidence in government in general. Why, honestly, in anyone's mind, would you trust government? They claim trust the science. Who's behind the science? All right, it's Bill Gates, who dropped out of out of college. He has no degree in medicine or anything like that, yet he has the biggest stake in all these vaccine companies, and he's made himself the czar of health for the world. He is also a proponent, and you can look in, Wall Street Journal even covered, he had a secret meeting with his buddies about depopulating the world. I don't find these people to be trustworthy to begin with about anything. So, a regular vaccine, fine. I've taken vaccines. Not everybody is prone to the same things, but this is a vaccine that they're admitting that it loses its potential in 8 months, and it's been so political. Like I said, from the beginning, they said, once everybody is vaccinated, we'll exterminate this. That was an outright lie. All right.
Yeah, but we have to keep those two things separated for this part of the conversation. So we have the likes of Bill Gates and George Soros and Klaus Schwab trying to manipulate the world through their money and their influence, and then we have the cycle of disease, all for different reasons. Yeah, exactly. If we go into that, Bill Gates thinks there's too many people. Make him in charge of vaccines, and I'm starting to get worried. but that's the one discussion. The other one, the one that I'm reaching into here, is what you said in 2018. So that was well before Corona, and you mentioned the 13-year cycle to the flu. Now, there's a question I have here, because you've also analyzed the influence of cycles of the sun. Now, I'm just correlating, and now that I'm talking to you, I want to ask you, is there a correlation to cycles in the sun and cycles in disease that you or Socrates has found?
Yes, if you look at when the solar activity goes into minimum and you get these periods of cold, that's when the Black Death takes place and things of this nature. Why? Because when it's very cold, crops don't plant, etc., and so people get malnutrition, and as a result, that makes them more susceptible to disease. So the big plagues have always come effectively, they correlate to these periods of extreme cold. even if you can probably Google and find that John Adams, during the American Revolution, was complaining that the ground was so cold, it was frozen 2 feet deep, that they couldn't even plant anything. So this is what I'm talking about. When it does get very cold, then you can't, plant crops, etc., and that results in malnutrition. So that's why they correlate together very well historically. But viruses have a natural cyclical aspect to them. That's why they change the flu vaccine every year. They try to guess what the strain will be this year because they know it's a cycle. It's not going to be the same one year after year after year. And many times in these flu epidemics, it's not even just one, it's several.
Yeah, okay.
So it depends. And some people will be okay and other people will not. We have to understand that these things are cyclical, and that's just what nature really is, just like we have the 4 seasons. Everything has its own cycle.
Yeah, exactly, and we're going into winter right now. All right, okay, let's leave the health bit there. Another quote that I would like to make here from your announcement of the World Economic Conference next month is this. The monetary crisis cycle and the money crisis, including the cryptocurrencies and the Know Your Client regulations, to be imposed with the stealth rise of a new world regulator from the G20, outside of all national jurisdictions, the Financial Action Task Force. So could you tell me I hadn't heard of it. So what is the Financial Action Task Force? What is their mission as you see it? And how far along are they currently?
Well, they're pretty far along. Their theory or their belief is that they would really have no problem if everybody paid all the taxes that they think we owe. When Janet Yellen just testified before Congress saying that she wanted to lower the reporting of banks to $600 per transaction, they were questioning her about it, and she says, we estimate that $7 trillion in unpaid taxes over the next decade will exist. $7 trillion. So that means you're talking about $30 to $40 trillion, or are you talking about raising the tax rate to 90%? So we only have $9 trillion in revenue. This is their idea. The IMF was pushing this agenda. They went after everybody, including the Vatican. They were going after the tax havens and telling them if they didn't give up everybody, they would be taken out of the SWIFT system. So they couldn't even buy or sell. So you had all these tax havens starting to give up people. You look at Germany, and they paid bribes to the Swiss bankers to turn over the German names and sneak the names out of the banks. So this is what they do. My solution was to you go with the coupons. We end this taxation. We run the government the way the Roman Empire did, basically, and we basically retain our freedom. Schwab's idea is basically take everything. So what they're doing is basically they want to know absolutely everything. If you look at the BIS, Bank of England, this move to eliminate paper money and move to a cryptocurrency, it's very serious. If I give you a $100 bill, all they can track is knowing that I gave you a $100 bill. In a cryptocurrency, they're going to know where I got the 100 from to begin with. They can trace every transaction of that all the way back.
I know. Yeah, we call it the war on cash here.
So it's a substantially different. But this is based on their idea that we are all guilty, we can't be trusted, and they want their pound of flesh from everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
And my argument has been that quite honestly, that it doesn't matter what they take, they'll always spend more than whatever they take in. It's irrelevant.
I agree with you that the solution would be well, not that's the simple solution that you make in your newsletter over and over again. No career politicians, transparency on government, and modest government. A government that has as its primary task to keep itself smaller rather than grow until it blows up like what we're going through now. The reason that I mentioned the Financial Action Task Force is some examples in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the central bank tried to regulate Bitcoin out of existence. And in the Netherlands, the Dutch bank, Rabobank, is banning business accounts from using cryptocurrencies. At the same time, El Salvador, as a country, has adopted Bitcoin. So my question is twofold. These examples of trying to regulate Bitcoin out of existence, would that be something coming out of that Financial Action Task Force? And El Salvador moving to Bitcoin, do you see other countries following that?
Yes, I mean, I think that, El Salvador basically was just kind of looking at this as a novel idea, but I don't really see that they understood what was taking place. I really believe that Bitcoin was created by the government and was released. Now, if somebody created blockchain, they would be making a fortune on royalties. All right? Why do we not know? Oh, it's some Japanese guy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's absurd. And that's why I think it was just simply the government that stuck this out there to get people to get accustomed to cryptocurrency. And then at the end of the day, what they will do is they will confiscate all the cryptocurrency and convert it into their own, which will be administered by their central bank. So they don't want competition. They're not going to allow competition.
Exactly. That though you've gone public on that for years, I believe. They're not going to allow competition, so Bitcoin will not be allowed. But it's still. Are you surprised that it's still here at $55,000 today?
No, not really. The idea that it's outside the system, it's a store of wealth. It can't be a store of wealth if it fluctuates. All right. And the government has been able to confiscate Bitcoin in any criminal transaction so far. So I really think it was the government that started it and has allowed it to flourish because it gets people acclimated and they think, cryptocurrency is good, it's survivable. So then what happens is they then cancel the paper currency. Here you go, you have cryptocurrency. And they go, okay, that's pretty good. Cryptocurrency's all right. I mean, if I go to Starbucks or whatever, you look at the generation, they don't even pay with money. They just hold up their phone anymore.
It is my understanding. No, I have to pose this as a question. But it is my understanding of the way I look at it, but I don't know. I have no knowledge on this, is that central bank digital currencies, that's what you're talking about, their development or their implementation is behind the curve. They're not there yet. It's got another year or 2 years in the making, so they're too late. How do you look at that?
No, that really depends upon what central bank you're looking at. They could implement it by January.
You think? Okay.
I wouldn't listen to that. But the IMF is already trying to sell their cryptocurrency to replace the dollar for international transactions.
I mentioned...
So they're already moving in that direction.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know they're moving in that direction, but this January, that surprises me.
And the head of the ECB is on Klaus Schwab's board at the World Economic Forum. The head of the IMF is on there. The head of the EU was there. She resigned for appearance purposes. The three of them are Klaus Schwab's appointees. The head of the WHO is a Klaus Schwab appointee. He's got them all in. He's absolutely has everything under control.
Yeah, Well, let's see about that. Okay. Let's do some current affairs there, because you also write and go public and saying, well, it's not going to work. It's falling apart. So they don't have it all under control. It is falling apart, and we will see faith in government. That's also a long-term prediction that you made. We see it collapse 2022, right? Could you?
Yes, 22 to 23, and they know they have, I think, this window, and you can see them starting to become more aggressive because they see the resistance is starting to rise.
Okay, I have just for housekeeping. I have a whole bunch of more questions. If you're okay with time, I will continue. If you're not, we are at 45 minutes now, so that's.
I am going to have to leave because I do have another.
Okay, then
another one coming up.
Okay, then let me close with that Netherlands thing, because this is of personal importance. In the Netherlands, so I mentioned that our government was fired for corruption, for behavior. We had elections, and now the same people are appointing themselves again. Nothing has changed. We see that all over the world. We see demonstrations opposing the corona passport mandates are forbidden in the Netherlands. Judges uphold the government position in the Netherlands instead of our laws, constitution, or international agreements. And at the same time in the Netherlands we go, well, at least we're not Australia. Could be worse. But it's falling apart all over the world. In your September 20 newsletter, you said sometimes the little guy can shut down government. Well, if the problem is so big on a global scale, and you're talking to the little guy now, that would be me. How do you envision that the little guy would take on SWAP? What would you have us do?
Basically, it reaches a point, kind of like Atlas Shrugged, that it reaches a point where they're not going to be able to sustain this. And as I said, their idea was that they could push through this communistic idea, more of a feudalistic communism. But as I said, Russia, the communist revolution worked there because the people didn't own anything to begin with. They were just coming out of serfdom in 1861. So there wasn't family wealth that they could pass on, etc. So, I mean, in the West today, everybody has houses and cars, etc. They're not going to give that up. So that is part of the problem, that they have misjudged. And we're just looking at resistance is building up really throughout Europe. And the key here is you get either a bloody revolution or a bloodless revolution. And the critical factor is often the police or the military. It's like when Yeltsin stood on the tanks in Russia in 91 and said, "Don't fire upon our people." They didn't. As soon as they didn't, the government collapsed. Take Venezuela, as long as the government can survive, as long as the police and the military are willing to shoot their own people. So that's the difference. Even in Ukraine, I was advising some people that were on the barricades out there in Maidan. And I told them, if you turn the police to your side, Yanukovych will have to flee. And I said the key is that his goons that he was bringing in were Russians. They were not Ukrainians. And when that was pointed out to them, the police switched sides. They started defending the people against Yanukovych, and the revolution worked. But exactly the same thing you're seeing. That's when the U.S. and CIA and Europe stands up and says, okay, fine, we want these people in. And I know what was told on the opposite side. They said, if you revolt against this, you will not get support from the West. So the people had to accept some of the very same corrupt people that were still there. They did not want to do that, but the West, Europe and the United States stuck them in. So it's always the same thing. These people have nothing else but career politicians to steal whatever they possibly can.
Do you dare to answer?
That's why I say career politicians have got to go. That's the number one thing.
Would you, just putting you on the spot, but would you dare answer that question then? So in your book, I'm rereading that thing currently, and I'm keeping it up in front of the camera. The cycle of war and the coronavirus. You claim that in Europe, revolution is inevitable. So if I were to ask you, if it's inevitable and it's either peacefully or with blood on the streets, on which one would you put your money currently?
Well, there's a lot of basic examples. I mean, you have police in Rome switching and defending the people. I mean, the same thing in Naples. So this is good. I mean, it shows that we can possibly have this bloodless revolution rather than guns in the street sort of thing. It all depends upon the police and the military. And there's nothing for them to gain out of this. Their own futures are being destroyed by these very same people. So this is substantially different than the Russian Revolution, where, as I said, the people had nothing to lose to begin with. Now they have everything to lose. So I think there's a higher probability that we can see once the police and the military abandon the current political process, then you get the bloodless revolution.
Okay, let's end there then, and maybe if we in good health, and if you allow me, we pick this up on a whenever date in the future. But let me close there. Macron in France was willing to give up his Security Council seat at the United Nations in exchange for a European Union seat, so he could get his European army. So if that would be his line of reasoning, then he is afraid of losing the support of the army and the police force in the different member states. That could be the reason that he's pushing for a European army currently. I'm talking to people in the military and in the police force in the Netherlands, and if it's up to them, then there's hope. I see them not upholding the criminal behavior of our Dutch government.
No, that's a very good sign. And what Macron is doing is from history. It's called the Nika Revolt in Byzantine. The police and the local military were against the emperor. He was about ready to flee. His wife told him there's a legion outside that was not Greek. Bring them in. They came in and they slaughtered everybody. They killed over 40,000 people, and the emperor survived. So the key of the Nika Revolt is you bring in a different police or military that will then fire on people because they're not their neighbors. They don't know them. Exactly. So that's what Macron is really trying to do. He'd send Italians into France or Germany, and then they go, oh, yeah, the Germans, they did this to me before, or whatever. Rather than using French against French, because he knows that's a risk.
Martin Armstrong, thank you so much for talking to this little guy. Stay healthy, and I will look for you again in the future. And thanks for all the information that you put out there, free of charge for everybody. Take care.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
All right.
Goodbye.
Het gaat hier vandaag over saamhorigheid.
Dagje zonder hemel. Rustig, liegt niet. Normaal maken, wat niet is normaal.
Every
Alleen
nation,
maar blauwe
in
lucht.
every region, now has a decision to make.
En dan ook geen hel meer.
You think I'm joking? Predator
Dat
drones.
is best makkelijk.
You will never see it coming.
Wat dacht je, alle mensen
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.
bezig met vandaag.